Got something a little bit new in store for the intro today. We'll just have to see, won't we? I'll move that slightly more there. Get that out of the way. Let's see if I can hear us.
We're on live.
Hey, Liam's here. What up, Liam? Liam! You're going to enjoy the Boostagram section, mate. I can already tell you that now. Patricia is also in the chat. Ayo, ayo. How come I'm not hearing anything? There we go. There we go. That sounds better. Excuse my coughing. Petar, exciting. Got 3 people in the chat already. Damn.
I like it.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, I'm going to make this full screen so we can... No, not that one. Yeah, that's hot. It's hot. Yeah, I've had a little bit of a cough for the while. It doesn't seem to really be going away, but I don't feel bad either. So
Yeah, I feel the same way. I've got that exact thing where it's like it feels like I've got it. It's just hanging around. Doesn't really stop me from working out or anything, but it's just annoying enough.
Slightly annoying, yeah. Juan's wearing his Torian Pro gear that he's snagged for free because they were just giving out tons of it.
In fact, today I was at the gym wearing this
over
the top of the other shirt I was wearing, and a guy came up to me and stopped me lifting. And
Yeah.
He was like, "Are you a judge?"
Are you a judge?
And I was like, "No, I just got it for free from the gym."
You'd be like, I judged one of those things as well. I was a...
Yeah,
what
you
do they
were.
call it?
You were a judge
not-
for
not
the Open, the CrossFit Open.
Not a judge, right? What's the name of those people? It's like
I mean, now technically a judge.
Okay.
Counter, I guess. Yeah.
I actually did a better job than Juan. Juan got in trouble because he
got in
wasn't...
trouble. I wasn't doing it strictly enough.
Yeah. Which was pretty funny. Very amusing. Okay, we've got a minute here to chat. What should be our question for today? I might be doing something like, what's the... Well, if anyone in the chat has a question they think related to this topic, chuck it in.
About living in history. Well, I think you're going to have to clarify, because I asked someone already about this today, we're going to be talking about living in history.
Yeah.
And they didn't understand when I explained it to them that it was going to be about that. So maybe
Ignorant.
Maybe they think it'd be something else. Does anybody understand Karen when he says ignorant? That could be the question. Do you understand ignorant?
Keep talking long so there's not a gap.
No.
Talk about something. Yes, talk about something.
No. They get quietness.
This is why you're a shit streamer.
They can enjoy their own thoughts.
This is why I'm a better podcaster than you are.
I think streaming and podcasting, I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone just thinks Karen's just the useless one of the equation.
Yeah.
I think streaming and podcasting are two very different things though. I think, streaming is its own...
You are correct, and I'm better at both.
Its own, like, putting in continual dribs and drabs of energy so that it can sustain however many hours you want to jump in and out.
Yes, Peter gets it. Cute way of saying ignorant. Dang.
Say cute way.
It's a way of saying it.
Oh, way of saying. Say cute way?
You said cute way, but
A
it's...
cute way, okay.
Yeah, it is kind of cute. It's like, hey, you're ignorant. Kawaii.
This is why Karen, literally first date Karen goes on girls and he says ignorant and they're like, please lose my number. Do not call me again. It's the ignorant use.
I've already done the job by then.
Good. That cough's still around. All right. Let's rock and roll.
Yeah.
You know, some would say if Karen was a good podcaster, he would have started at 7.
If I hadn't had to jump back in and continually talk into the mic because you don't know how to, we would have started.
7 o'clock. What you hear right now, folks, we're living through history of Karen's denial that he has not started at 7 o'clock. They say sometimes extreme ownership exists for humans, but not for Karen.
Here we go. All right, kicking it off. 3, 2, 1.
We all can be mortal.
Yeah, we definitely are
Nice
Mere
change up.
Mortals. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Mere Mortals Musing Sessions. There's a session that we do live every Sunday, 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And we pick a topic and we get deeper into it, a bit more structured than our normal philosophy in the park.
Yep.
You have Kyron here on this.
Got
side.
King Juan, the good podcaster on the other side.
The quiet podcaster on the other side of the microphone. And I chose today's topic. So we're going to be talking about living in history. So what do I mean by that one? You said you've talked to some people and they've already...
Yes, I mentioned this today over lunch.
They struggled to
and there was
understand
yeah,
what that
and
means.
also, first thing I actually typed into Google. I was just like, okay, living in history, let's do some research.
Okay,
I
yeah.
couldn't find anything. I couldn't find like articles on this or anything like that.
Yeah.
What I coming across a whole load is just the reenactment of history, of historical fights. and
Living
that sort of thing.
history.
Yeah, living history.
I did
So-
actually bring up a portion of this because I did want to highlight how this is not what I'm talking about, living in history. I don't know why my mouse has disappeared, which is an activity that incorporates historical tools, activities, and dress and into an interactive presentation that seeks to give observers and participants a sense of stepping back in time.
Yeah, so I think that's what everybody
Yep.
ended up like thinking.
So that's
the podcast would
living
be about.
history,
Yeah,
living
history,
history.
not living in history.
But that is not what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about living in history.
Yep.
So this was a concept I suppose I've gotten probably from Sam Harris is where, if I had to drag it back to its roots, is where I would say it. And basically, he had this moment where 9/11 happened. So the planes flew into the two towers, and he said sort of to himself like, wow, this was the first time that I realized I'm living in history. I'm actually living in a time, in a moment in space that is going to be viewed back as historical. It's going to be viewed back as a change in the way that the world operated or things like that. Like it was a unique moment that could be looked back and said everything changed from then. So I wanted to sort of explore this theme idea because we're constantly living in history in one sense, but I wanted to explore particular moments that we might have ourselves had of maybe general trends that we are seeing or something like that. We think, oh yeah, this thing could be looked back as a historical moment or even a trend. So not just a moment in time, but a gradual growing thing. And how you can maybe observe that, how you can appreciate it, perhaps.
if it's even important,
it's-
like should you even care about doing that or not?
Yeah, if it's agreed. If it's even possible to do that as well. So that's, I suppose, the general theme of what I wanted to talk about today. So if you didn't have any particular section of something to get into, then I'll
Start us off with a question. I think we'll go from there.
Okay, cool. All right. So one of the things that really got to me was, okay, what's perhaps a one that could be like triggered back to us, for example, that both of us that, maybe for ourselves, we could be, wow, okay, that was a particular moment. And then even perhaps people, if we go on to do something incredible, or if we gain some sort of popularity, or even maybe, even if just Petar is still
Become
here
notorious.
in 30 years time. Yeah, if we're notorious in 30 years time, people would look back and maybe go like, what would, that was a particular moment. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on us living together in this apartment. Could this perhaps be looked at back upon as, wow, that was like a foundational moment of the Mere Mortals? The Mere Mortals, they were doing something together. Like we started 6 months before we actually came into here, but we moved into here basically, March of 2020 when coronavirus was really kicking off. And we've been here for 2.5 years, roughly. Since then, could this time period that we're in right now be looked back upon as like, yeah, the Mere Mortals? That's where they like grew up. That's
Like
where,
if you want to call it like the origin story or something.
Yeah,
In a way, I guess, for sure. I mean, I would see it in the like the space, it's become the background for a lot of the conversations that we have, both interviews, podcasts, these musing sessions. So yes, in that regard, if there was any success to be seen in the future, you could reflect back on these ones in a similar way that people could reflect back on the old Joe Rogan episodes with bubbles were coming up and, you know, the sort of level of stuff.
Yeah.
Now, ours is a higher level of quality, folks. But you could look, I think you could say that, it's living
Joe
through.
Rogan, learn how to podcast, mate.
God.
We'll teach you.
But yeah, I mean, as you said at the beginning, the hard bit of that question is like everything is history that you're living through. So yes, it could be seen historically in that context, definitely. If you eventually say many years through and it's like, oh, okay, the podcast was just a podcast and that's it. It's not going to be remembered for much else. Does it still become historical? I guess from some perspectives of people, it could be like, yeah, it's still historical because that's where it all began and there was the first studio and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or you could also just not think about it at all. I tend to think...
Wow. I'm getting the feeling you don't like this theme or you're not connecting with it.
Oh, there's aspects of it. I have some strong views, I think,
okay.
on either side.
Ooh.
But I'm going to say
Held
that
loosely, I hope.
there's... If it becomes, I'll just say, if the podcast becomes like extremely successful and you become known worldwide, it would feel like there was a moment of living in history of like, oh, that was where that began. Because if you then move this studio to like a full set studio or it's a full traveling kit or something else crazy, then that's where it all began. That's where it feels like it would be. And if it doesn't, then I don't know if I would be like, okay, that was living history. That was just how it eventuated. So
okay.
I guess more so the trend for me, I was having a quick Google in the living in history and what that actually meant. And I don't know if you did this Google at all, but it was like...
I didn't Google at all.
What was the top 10 like historical moments that happened between 2000 and 2010?
Okay.
Right? So I was trying to find like that particular decade because I didn't really have too many details on 2010 to 2020, right? Now, these were a couple of things that...
Can I have a guess at some of them?
You can have a guess at a couple of them.
You know, GFC is obviously going to be one of them.
Yep.
I feel that would have to be in there. Just trying to think. Maybe did SpaceX do anything in that period? Was that around yet?
I don't even think so.
Could not have been around then. In that case, I'd say the invention of social media. That would probably be right up there.
That didn't even make top 10.
Interesting. The iPhone would probably be a big one.
No, didn't make it either.
No.
Which is odd because what did make it was the world's first iPad. Yeah. So again, there's like a random like list, right? So like there's things like we're saying iPad and iPhone. So like iPad and iPhone. Here's some others which were noted. MH370 went missing, right? There was Nelson Mandela dying.
Yeah.
Right? Ice bucket challenge.
Oh, God.
Right?
Yeah, okay. I'm discounting this list already.
Well, the ice bucket challenge, like in terms of like the impact through it, I guess you could talk about it. So it was like this list that talked about these things, right? And I was like, okay, some of them I remember. Like I remember the ice bucket challenge. I remember like planking challenge. I remember iPad. I remember the MH370 went missing. There was another plane as well. There was the...
Just what website is that out of interest?
If you type in Google, like top 10. It was... I don't
you don't actually...
It was like, you know, when you type into Google,
fucking BuzzFeed
and it gives you like a little summary thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was like, I'll just pick them as like events. But what it struck to me, in my mind, I was like, okay, some of those things, you weren't living in history. Like in the theoretical of, like, I guess it's Sam Harris, that example of the Twin Towers and being hit. I guess you were living in history.
Yeah, that's
you
one.
were living in history. Well, you were living in history in the sense that it was like you were actively also participating in watching it. Now, you weren't active in the sense that you weren't at the scene. But with something like an iPhone or an iPad or the MH370, were you living through history when you heard about it on the news? I guess in a way, but the closer you are to the event itself, the more it has any reason to be living history. So we just, like the question you asked about the podcast, does it become living history?
I think it's when you interact with it. That's sort of what I'm getting at. So the very first time I remember this, the very first time I watched a video through Google Video, for example. That's kind of a historical moment for me personally, at least, which is like, wow, this one act was the first act of what consumes, I don't know, 3-4 hours of my day, daily now, or at least as like a huge part of my day. Putting on a video, and sort of
Watching
watching it.
Yeah, I guess what I ended up writing from thinking through it was that I guess the more the impact to you as an individual that particular event or the memory has, or the emotion that you attach to the memory, then the more it'll stick and the more it'll be like, yes, you understand and know that you're living through history. Now, whether that's important or not, we can talk about it later. But if the particular event doesn't impact you in any way, then like it's quite hard for you to put yourself in the position of living in history. But two, is it even worth, like that's a conversation of, is it worth even thinking it through to be like, oh, it doesn't impact you at all. Like, can you really put a call to say, yeah, I was in that historical moment when they announced the iPad. It's like, well, maybe that moment was someone talked about it on the news, or maybe you saw a video or something equivalent when, I guess the way that I would think about it is like living through history would be like if you were someone who were working on the iPad, or you were Steve Jobs or Steve Wozniak or anything like that, and you'd be like, oh yes, we built it and I live through history. That is what I would assume when you say like iPad, they live through history in terms of impacting either by the creation or you were the first to purchase or something like that. But for me, I'm like, well, I didn't buy an iPad. I've never bought an iPad. I remember it coming out, but I don't remember it first advertised, someone talking about it, maybe like a friend having it. So, if I had to even then try to be like, oh, like you're living through history, like try to remember, I don't even know what to attach any emotion to. So I'm like, okay, I kind of don't care. I kind of don't know. I don't know what's going on with it. Maybe I'm too young. It's like, oh, okay, that makes it extremely difficult to try to be like really position me in living history because it's got such a little impact to me. I'm like, well, do I even care about doing this?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've actually chosen a good example because the iPad, same thing for me. My use of tablets over the years has been restricted to going into a shop and I have to click on some things sometimes when my dad has one and looking over his shoulder when he shows me a video once every 3 months when that random event occurs. Yeah. So I think that's a good point where it's it's somewhat subjective in many ways, the living in history part, and like there's no real point to this per se, like this discussion. I just found it kind of cool to think about, okay, what is it possible maybe to even look at an event that's happening right now and you could then say, and I think not the iPad but the iPhone, the first smart touchscreen phone, I think that could be if you were one of the first people, or not even the first, just when you got it, just to realize maybe, okay, this is game changer because this is going to become such a huge part of my life in many ways.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I was gonna maybe move this a little bit away from the iPhone, iPad though conversation to something like that's happening right now that probably is a little bit more relevant.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be good. So let's put it in perspective on the Ukraine-Russia war that's happening right now. Whether you want to call it war, altercation, whatever side you want to talk about, it doesn't really matter. Now,
does anyone not call it a war?
Well, I think if you look into
just a bit of fisticuffs,
if you look into Russian media, RussiaDaily.com, they don't often call it war.
Oh yeah, they'd probably just say it's a stampede.
There's a lot of if you actually look into the Russian media that gets populated back to the Russians, it's a lot of we need to do this because of the fascist Ukrainians who are trying to etc.
Gotcha.
So it depends. Now, but the Russian-Ukraine war. Now, some people right now listening could be like, okay, like that particular topic, are we living in history? Are we saying like, wow, that war's happened? And again, going back to my definition of for me, it's not impacting me.
Yeah, I would say no.
There's a lot of indirect. No, there's both indirect impacts for us in the sense of share market prices. Some of that conversation led to high oil,
6 order effects.
Exactly, like really low. But it's not direct impact. So it's not like if you were living in Ukraine, okay, you're living through history and that's going to be impacting you. For me, I know a friend
living in history.
And I've got a friend who is Ukrainian and their family are all in Ukraine, and I talk to them about what's going on. They're living in history and they're probably experiencing and they're attaching emotions to the actual actions and events that are happening. I'm not so much. I just hear it from the news. I'm seeing media. I can't really comment on it. I have no idea. I'm attaching anything to say I'm living in history, and I'll probably look back on it maybe in 20 years and go, oh yeah, I was during a time, but can I cement an emotion to an action or an event? Not particularly. To be honest, it's probably mostly the fact that it was the first time I saw really high quality footage on TikTok of a war. Like it was the first time we've seen like a really high quality war because of the phones and everything that we have. But, and I just pulled this stat up, and you can pull it up if you want to anyways. This is on worldpopulationreview.com. In 2020 and 2021, the different countries which had either 1,000 to 10,000 casualties as part of a war, terror, or insurgency. So there's Algeria, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Chad, there's Colombia, Iraq, Libya, Mali, Mozambique, Myanmar, Nigeria, South Sudan, Syria, Tanzania, Tunisia. They also talk about the Mexican drug cartel war, which is like killing heaps of people at the moment, and the Ethiopian civil war that's on right now. Now, I'm sure 90% of what I just said then, most of our listeners, including me that I just read that, I had no idea that some of these things were happening. Absolutely no idea. Now, it hasn't been populated in the news at all. And I'm willing to say that there are some things in that list, like the Colombian one and probably the Mexican one, that probably impact me more than the Russian-Ukraine war. More. But because it hasn't been publicized, it hasn't really been talked in the media, for me, I go, okay, I would have to like seek out some information for this to try and articulate that I'm living in history for those particular moments. And so I go, okay, just because the Russian-Ukraine one is, in front of everyone being talked about, in fact, doesn't even get that talked about that often anymore in the media if you watch the news. But it's like, okay, some of those things that are happening, they might be really big and huge, at least depending on like the media state that gets run with it. Do you even bother trying to go, okay, this looks like it's really big. I'm going to say I live in history. So with the Russia-Ukraine, do you think that's something that you paid, or even talking about it now, you'd say, okay, I'm going to choose to think about like I've lived in history through that moment.
I think it's so relevant that in 30 years' time, no one will care about it.
Okay.
That's the sort of, now I don't mean to be like crass when I say that, but I mean in the sense that in 30 years' time, if what's like a kind of fun discussion point, people will still probably be talking about, do you remember when the internet was invented? Do you remember when you got your first phone, that first thing that is now, added, it goes with you everywhere. How often are you separated from your phone for? It's almost like a bloody surrogate device in many respects. If you chose that sort of topic or brought it up, I think that'll just be, it was a thing, it was an event that occurred, and it impacted a shit ton of people for, however long it'll go for. Let's just say a couple of years, maybe a decade, who knows. That I think will still just be, if you're looking in terms of like the world impact, maybe that's not going to be that much of a historical event any more than the Nigerians, the Colombian drug war, things like that. So just because something is like being shoved in your face right now, and it seems super important, and it seems like, man.
But even if it does, and I guess what I'm saying is like, okay, let's play devil's advocate and say, no, this causes, because currently the Finnish are trying to get themselves into NATO, and all these other countries are trying to do it, and then this causes like some havoc, and then we got Russia and China versus NATO, and holy hell, we're in World War III. Now,
Okay.
let's not wish that. However, let's think back to World War I, right? How did World War I begin? And I think it was the assassination of
Prince Ferdinand,
right? Now, when Prince Ferdinand was, assassinated, was someone there at that time being like, wow, I'm living in history. You know what I mean? Like, would Sam Harris,
could have been
seeing that, hearing about it, would be like, I'm living in history? Or would have been like,
See, that's a sneaker one, because I think most people would have said no. How could this random, I think it was the Serbian, Austro-Hungarian, like two tiny factions of politics,
all of a sudden create this absolute avalanche. And I think so. Ultimately, so when I asked, I guess my initial answer to this question, I'll say, is it worth living in history?
Or is it worth thinking about?
Or is it worth thinking about? And my answer is, I don't even think you can. I think flat out, you can't, as much as you want to, you can't be so conscious that you are living in history, because I think ultimately you're just looking back on an event that you've already either put emotions against a time frame, or you haven't. And then anything else, you're trying to subjugate the emotion then back onto the time where it happened. Even if it was a couple of seconds, it's not at that exact moment. So to be so super conscious of yourself, be like, I'm living in history right now and right now and right now, I find it a very hard thing to do. And then in my mind, I go, okay, probably a pointless thing to do too.
See, I think you can have moments. I disagree with that. So I think you can have a moment. So I'll list one for me was the first time that I saw the whole value for value in action. The first time I really saw how that worked. And the time we got our first Boostagram in, I think that will go down for me at least. And look, this, like I said, it can be subjective, and then it can also be like, maybe I'd be willing to throw a bet out, and I'm totally willing to be wrong in this. Is that value for value will be it'll be part of the common lexicon in 15 years, 20 years time, maybe.
Yep. But
then I could be like, fuck, I remember that first one. Like,
so
I remember. Holy
but see, you're
shit.
saying this. Let's say you're saying this now after a year. Like you're saying,
yeah.
Okay, I can say that I'm living history now. Again, devil's advocate. Let's say in 5 years, it all doesn't work. It's actually they're doing another pathway, goes completely different way. 30 years from now, would you still look back and be like, oh, I lived through history at that failed attempt, and I remember my first Boostagram as history?
No. Because it obviously in the grand scheme of things like really didn't matter that much.
Gotcha. Okay.
So you can be wrong. Yeah, you can be the guy who's like, fuck, this is revolutionary. This is going to change the world, and it's pets.com or something, or it's like
but that's what I mean. I think as you just worded it there, to say you're living in history and to be like, oh, you can be wrong. Sure, but it has to be a retrospective look at the past and what the outcomes of all of those situations have happened. You can't be living in history. Like you can't at the moment be like, oh, I am living in history.
Yeah, you can make that claim.
All right, you reckon?
Yeah,
okay.
sure, you can make that claim, but you can be wrong, and that's fine.
Gotcha. Okay, I in my mind, I'm like, you can't. If you lay that claim to say you're living in history, but then it doesn't become history in the future, I'm like, well,
then you're wrong.
then you weren't living history then. And it's like, well,
yeah, you were wrong.
Yeah, then I was like, well, I guess in my mind, it's like, well, then it's like a useless ploy to do that, to think living in history, and not. And I'll just go, well, I just wouldn't matter. And then in the future, if you were, then it's like, oh, cool, okay, I might remember some things.
Look, here's maybe a different way of putting it. If I were to ask everyone in the world what is like a trend that is occurring now or has maybe started in the last 5 years, what would be what would be that trend that people would still talk about in 20 years time maybe? And so a bunch of people would and if let's just say we did this on 2020, like the January 1st 2020, start of a new decade. Tons of people probably would have guessed I don't know, the invention of Clubhouse, for example. That'd probably be wrong. Some people probably would have said, and the sort of people who had their finger on the pulse, they would have said Corona. Like Corona started. This is going to be something that'll be talked about in a decade's time. Which I think we can all agree that that'll probably be the case.
Yep.
Yeah. So for me, it's more like it's almost like a prediction thing in a sense. Like how good is your prediction skills? And you can be good, you can be shit at it, and that's sort of also what I was wanting to explore with this. Like, is it worth making even predictions like this? Like, is that a question worth asking? I think it is, because it's kind of fun, and it can also dictate your life in many ways. I would say for me, even though it started long ago, the first time I really used Bitcoin in a peer-to-peer transaction way, that is going to be also, i.e. a Boostagram. That for me is going to be like, whoa, yeah, I remember the first time I did that. And that in 20 years time, I think would be like, how did we ever go without it, sort of thing.
Yeah, okay. All right. I reckon we should jump into some Boostagrams and then we can challenge.
Speaking of Boostagrams, so here's a couple of comments while you're bringing them up.
Yep.
Oh man, this dodgy mouse is annoying. So Peter says special military operations. That's probably what they are referring it to is in the in
Oh,
Russia.
gotcha, from Russia.
In
Yeah.
He
Probably.
says, I remember the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Soviet Union. Everything seemed different after the threat of nuclear war disappeared. Times were good for a while. Mm-hmm. Yep, that I think is a pretty damn big event. And it's also, it's also sort of like a retrospective one, which is once history has happened, you can look back and be like, oh yeah, I remember the first time I used the internet. I remember the first time I got a phone.
Yep.
So maybe you won't remember those moments, but if you're living in the moment and you're really thinking about it, maybe that's something that in 20 years time you could be like,
Yeah, and I think this is where I'm getting.
Yeah, I did that.
I'll tell you where I'm getting stuck in the example of Sam Harris, where I disagree with Sam Harris.
okay, cool.
And I guess what we'll talk about the topic.
We'll get into that afterwards. Liam F says the problem is none of these things directly affect you. You probably look back at COVID and lockdowns as major history. I'll take that bet. 1,000 satoshis. All right, you're on. So we'll need to clarify, Liam, what exactly the bet is. You write down what you think the bet is, and then I'll say whether I take it or not.
Correct.
Wani, got some Boostagrams?
I do. Okay, so this one's from
Oh yeah.
user 118-4575217825312. And it was directly after the podcast was completed last month, actually.
You're going to
last
enjoy
week.
this, people.
So its Karen is a super massive faggot. So 100%. That's what we talked about at the beginning. This is what happens when you do handstands, folks. That was 420 sats sent using Fountain.
A spontaneous.
Spontaneous sats sent. We actually onboarded a friend of ours. To jump on.
We'll talk about that.
And then the next one there we got. It's Liam. Liam F is 29 and wets the bed is the name of the user here.
Yeah. I wonder who that could be.
I love the podcast. That's 80 sats.
Thank you very
Fountain.
much.
So
Liam
F is 29 and wets the bed.
And wets the bed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate those things. And the love.
The other one here, we got Petar, who's also on the live right now. Solid goals in good directions. Thank you very much. So yes, they are solid goals, and I've got my annual goals. Tinkering away. I've got
about
starts
that
in
soon,
August,
yeah.
so that's 5,000 sats. And
Ooh,
using
thank you,
Fountain,
Peter.
thank you. Then we've got a one from Mary Oscar. Now he sent this, I believe, also to the Valley for Valley channel, but this is T-Boost. 60,000 sats sent using Fountain.
And that is what gets him up to the t-shirt level,
Correct.
which I already sent to him.
Exactly, yeah.
So-
he's got the shirt, so thank you very much, Mary. Oscar, appreciate it. And of course, sent using Fountain.
Yep.
What else?
The Fountain FM app, very good.
Absolutely. Then we got floydianslips. Satvertising, podcasting for Valley. One idiot's attempt at starting a Valley for Valley podcast.
Yeah,
4,321 sats sent using Fountain.
I'll talk more about that right at the end.
Okay. And we got another one from user 8870. Gracias dinero. 2 sats sent using Fountain.
Wow.
Woo! I like it. Hey, look,
I do.
I like.
I
seeing a little bit of different people.
Yeah,
so
international.
I don't mind at all. Gracias.
Gracias.
Another one from
Gracias, amigo.
Floridian Slips. There's another one that says advertising. Come have a listen. After all, we are just mere mortals. 4,567 sats sent using Fountain. Interesting. Okay. So this is someone who actually wants you to come and advertise. We can talk about it.
There's one more at the end, so we'll talk. We'll talk about that.
All right. Beautiful. Okay. Now from Petar, and this is 50,000 sats sent using Fountain. So again,
50,000.
Petar, dude, thank you very much.
Big baller.
I really like this discussion about onboarding, but I have one suggestion for anyone knowledgeable enough to try. So pay attention here, folks, if you're listening.
Okay.
In my experience, never be the one to first sell the idea of Bitcoin. Correct. Let the other person ask you about it and only then start the lessons. Reason is that when the price roller coaster inevitably drops, this person will resent and distrust you if you're the one who first planted those Bitcoin seeds, despite all the dire warnings you might have gave at the outset. Now, totally agree here, Peter. And I think the big piece here, is obviously the financial stuff that comes along with the talks of crypto, Bitcoin, blockchain. And I think I tried to do a good job, Peter, specifically, and I got my mum's actually on this one as well listening, but I actually tried to really, really hard when we were talking about it. We talked almost nothing of price. We only talked about one Bitcoin's one Bitcoin, one Ethereum's one Ethereum, one ADA's one ADA, and almost about the underlying technology in the blockchain. Like I spent more time on the Bitcoin white paper than I did on even explaining how to purchase Bitcoin and the DeFi centralized exchanges you can get. And even like we didn't talk about the price at all. It was just more like, that's what it is now. Cool. But just understanding the underlying. So, but that's also a good point though, Peter. It's hard to try to sell the idea of Bitcoin to someone, especially when, financials can be a big play.
Yeah, it's definitely a risky one because, we're very obviously excited about the crypto. I know Peter doesn't like that broad sweeping term, but I'm going to chuck it in. And it is hard because you get very excited about it. People are interested in what things people are excited about. But yes, it does have that financial aspect to it. I'll just give my little piece here, which was I onboarded our friend Joey, who was user 222 blah blah blah. Yep. Also the same user who then sent
Liam wets the bed.
Liam is 29 and wets the bed, and for that it was I was really trying to get the actions. I suppose that was what I was really trying to get across, which was here, Joey, download the Fountain app, do all of these things. I'll send you 20,000 sats to play with. Do whatever the hell you want with it, that sort of thing. So, yeah, the onboarding doesn't necessarily need to be like Juan does, and here's an NFT loaded value to
the same thing, right? If you're sending someone 20,000 sats, like you're just sending them, if I was sending someone 20,000 sats, they could equally just go and send it to the wrong address.
Yeah, for sure. But it's $5, not however much the NFT is that you gave to your sister and whatnot. So
that's what happens when you're a big ball effect.
Yeah, obviously. I think Peter's really right there, which is being careful about just not wrecking your friends or loved ones unintentionally.
Well, I was listening,
at least at the very least, don't be like, you should buy some.
Well, there was a particular I think it was podcast I listened to just today that they were talking about this thing, and just broadly on the context of like when you're trying to get people onto something, being not so much down the advising, onboarding type of level, but more the education level. So I think maybe this is towards the try to educate people on it, not so much be like you have to get on it, but like trying to educate them and go, this is what it is. Now you have a bit more of a better idea, so that if the question ends up being asked, like imagine if you actually wiped your memory, whatever it may be, and you either have a world where Bitcoin doesn't exist and a world where Bitcoin does exist and everything else has been wiped, which one, what would you choose? And then perhaps logically you might then reason that, okay, a world with Bitcoin might be a better one. Something like that. Okay, no, but I appreciate it. Petar, thank you very much. And then the final one, and which is again a stream of Floydian Slips here. Great episode, much better than the schlock over there at Podcasting for Value podcast. 4,567 sats sent using Fountain. Okay, so tell me about this Podcasting for Value.
Yeah, so I've seen, this is, I guess, one of the aspects of what you could maybe call advertising, encroaching in on the value for value.
Okay.
So there's a couple of people who do this, notably comic strip blogger on Podcasting 2.0. He always advertises his show AI.cooking.
Yep.
So Floydian Slips is doing it here. It's working because I'm going to do his for the next Value for Value podcast. So I'll tune in and do that. But yeah, it's I suppose you could argue very much that I'm doing the same thing. When I Boostagram into Podcasting 2.0, I always use Mere Mortals Podcast. I don't use my name, Kyron, or I say Kyron Mere Mortals Podcast in brackets.
Yep.
So it's then, I guess, about what level of pushing you do it. For me, I always try and add like a super interesting comment. It's not, most of the time it's not related to our podcast, but every now and then I'll be like, hey, we do this thing over here.
True.
Similar to what you were talking about. Come check us out. And yeah, so it's honestly, it's just encouraging. It's
cool. I like seeing it.
It's not that different from another very common podcasting tactic, which is to do crossovers. So, I'll have a little advertisement at the start of your show. You have a little advertisement for your podcast at the start of mine. And let's just say we're both true crime podcasts. Then we can, our audience will probably be interested in that other one sort of thing. So, this is just the cooler, more advanced tech way of doing a very similar thing.
Okay, fair.
So-
I didn't mind it.
Yeah, no. Hey, like he's sending in sats, man. I appreciate all sats of all kinds. If you listen to the last Value for Value, I got all sorts of like rant, like someone just sent in the number
Uno.
one.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah. So look, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for all the sats there, folks. For the
Yes,
Boostagram
yeah,
Lounge.
very much appreciate it, everyone.
Any other comments we've got in there before I jump into the difference? I think.
No, they're just talking about their own random stuff related to the bedwetting. So
Good.
No,
Who, Joey and
we'll
Liam?
let them fight it out in the comments.
So this is where I think in my mind when the conversation that I was a little bit like, oh, maybe this is different. So when you started off with Sam Harris around he's living in history of the Twin Towers, hit, and it's like, oh, I'm living in history.
Yeah,
right.
This is going to be a huge impact, and it'll dictate so many parts of.
And I think the reality is right. That does happen with really huge things that happen. I'm sure. If
atomic bomb.
If an atomic bomb, like when the atomic bomb
when
dropped,
it dropped.
but if it got dropped on like a country even more,
Yeah,
right?
like
Well,
if it happens tomorrow.
Let's say exactly. So all this crazy stuff. Now that would be, you could easily say you're living in history, but I don't think you have to almost, like as Sam Harris says, you're like, yo, I really realized that I was living in history. I'm like, man, I'm sure you realized it anyways. That when that happened, you're like, holy hell, this is humongous. It's like a big thing. You almost didn't have to, like, anywhere in the world, you could almost be like, okay, we've got some impact here in some way, shape, or form. I don't think that you have to try too hard. Now, I think you can certainly try to feel it more like in the moment. And so that's different. In the moment, I can, for sure, I agree with that. Cool, whatever it may be. But for you to really accurately know the history bit, because I think that's the bit. It's living in history, like that bit that it's history, unless it's assured, something that's so sure that it's going to be a historical thing that you care about, then it's more important than just living the moment than living in history. I'd go, okay, I think what you're talking about, Sam, there is more living in the moment and whatever happening. And that you could apply to absolutely anything. But to try to be correct or even care to be correct about the history bit, that's, I think, when the language of it, I go, well, there's no point to try to think if you're living in history. Just try to live in the moment and remember things. And then if the future, if you go, oh, that was a historical moment, and you can recollect that, oh, yeah, I can remember this happened in this specific thing, then you can recall and say like, oh, yes, I lived in history. So maybe my language would be, if you're living in the moment and can recall things, or you're keeping track of things on a daily basis, then maybe that does help in being able to relive history in some way, shape, or form. So maybe that's the language that I was missing, perhaps, because I've done this experience. So to give you an example, imagine that someone asked you that in the next 10 days you had to write your biography of your life so far. Mm-hmm. How easily do you think you could pinpoint more than, like, beyond the really crucial big things that have happened so far? Let's talk COVID. Let's talk 9/11. Maybe the GFC. Maybe something else. Beyond that, do you reckon you could really pull out in enough detail that you could write about it, things about living in history for you, and even the impact for you, that's beyond just your personal life? Of all the things that have happened in your life, whether it's for your loved ones, you, everything else, do you think you could write about, like, oh, I remember when, maybe MH370 went missing. I remember that day and like that news thing, and I can write this down and write details. Because I don't think I could. I think if I was to write a biography and I tried to write like some notes, I can remember lots of personal things because it's just impactful into my eyes. But to say like things that maybe are historical or someone else might view as historical, I'd be like, there's no way I could write it down. I have no idea. I didn't make any meaningful impact in my life to be able to recollect it in such detail.
Okay. I think I can. 5th of June 2013. That's the first time I ever approached a girl.
No. My question was, so nothing that is like from you, like not your personal, like an external action.
I'm trying to get what the point of the question is. Try reconfiguring it in a different way.
I think when the question here was, you can have history that happens that doesn't impact you.
Yes.
Pick something that didn't impact you.
Yep.
That you could be like, okay, I lived through that historical moment.
So that was a historical moment, but yeah, it didn't mean anything to me. Yeah.
I guess not. Well, it had impact to you in the sense like there was some emotion attached directly to you. I'm not saying like impact as in like, oh, it was terrible or it was fantastic, but it was impactful in the sense that you remember it because it was for you. Like I remember the first time I went to like a class in Queensland, but like it wasn't positive or negative. It was just like I remember it. It's an impact because it's like I was there doing it.
Yeah.
But can you, if you ever try to like articulate a random thing that occurred somewhere worldwide that maybe someone might say it's historical now, like could you pick of any detail on it, think it through, and be like, oh yeah, when MH370 went, like so people would say MH370. Obviously, there was another list. It's a historical moment between in the 2000s and 2010.
Such a shit list.
Yeah, I know, man. but that particular thing, could you say like, oh yes, I remember when that happened and hearing it?
No.
You know what I mean? And I think that's where I see in my mind, I go, okay, so if the whole context of is you should be living in history.
No.
You should be like, you should be. Well, I guess you didn't even put that forward, but I'm saying.
I just want to bring up the topic.
Yeah, but I think if in
it's
if
working,
someone's
it's
mind was
controversial.
like, oh, you should be if a historical thing happens, you should be trying to be living in history and being really called out of that forefront. I go, I just don't think you have a chance because you don't know the historical things that are happening in that moment.
Yeah. Okay. Here's maybe something that you'll appreciate because it's a bit more grounded. Would you agree that there are times and moments in life and perhaps even in collectively across humanity which are more important the actions that one takes in that time? So if you are in let's just say Stalingrad in what year would have been like 1943, 1944, around that period, and the city's being encircled by the Germans, maybe it was even a couple of years before that, and food's running out. And you sort of saw what was occurring, and then you had the foresight to be like, I'm going to start my own rationing. Maybe I'll start my own hoarding of certain food so me and my family can survive. So you could probably appreciate, okay, the actions that an individual took at that time were probably more important than the actions that they took 20 years later on a random Tuesday, for example.
Sure.
So what I'm sort of getting at is like, is it worth, for example, appreciating, okay, COVID's happening and I'm unsure of the degree of what's happening. So let's just say it's April of 2020. It's spreading across the world. It's the biggest topic. And let's just imagine that it was 1,000 times deadlier than it was. Your actions at that time, would it be worth being like, okay, somewhat this is a historical moment, like this is like crazy, my actions at this moment, and recognizing that, being like, okay, my actions at this moment are even more critical than perhaps my actions on a random Tuesday 5 years ago. So should I then use that sort of framework to think about what I do differently, for example?
Right,
So yeah, you get to the moment, something happens and you go, oh, I'm like living in history right now. Should I change my decision making based on this like realization, I guess?
Gotcha. Okay.
So it's more of a physical, like an actual.
Yeah,
outcome.
I get that. So I mean, my reaction is though that is a default human way. Like that is the default thing that a human will do. Again, that's the norm. That's the expected. If something humongous happens in the world or an event or an action, and it might not even impact you, I don't think you have to do anything. You will just by default be more interested, be more focused, have more consciousness on that event. And so by proxy, you'll either have emotions, thoughts, or anything attached to it, and we'll remember them and we'll do things about it. It's like,
I'm not necessarily sure of that. Because
what would be an example where that didn't happen for you?
Well, a lot of people would not, like, Corona was sort of happening, and it was just like, oh, business as normal. Like, I'll just see what happens. Like, they didn't perhaps appreciate the gravity of it. And so if it was 1,000 times worse, they might have been the ones who died off quicker. So perhaps it would be worth thinking about if maybe you're the type who lets things happen to you rather than maybe a instinctively proactive. And I can put myself in both camps. I think for COVID, I was a bit more concerned and took some actions, which I don't normally do.
But you did that not thinking that, were you actively like, okay, I am living in history, I'm going to take these actions?
Yeah, I think, yeah. I think that was a time where it was like, whoa, this is going to...
Can you remember? Okay, so for this to be true, what conscious thought, question, action did you take? They're like, okay, I'm going to do this differently now.
Just not spend as much time outdoors not outdoors, indoors actually, in enclosed places with other people who I didn't know. So like shopping and stuff, I would get in and get out as pretty quick as I could for a period.
Yeah, okay. I guess I agree with that. I mean, I'm like, yes, you definitely would react that way to something like an event like that. I guess I don't tie that back to the whole conversation of living in history though.
Okay.
You know, that's like you're reacting to something that's occurred, but I don't know where living in history falls in line.
That's fine.
With
like
that.
it's a topic. It's not one that resonated with you. That's cool. Yeah. Any more points you wanted to bring up or talk about? Those were my most ones.
I think I'm more ended up coming out to living history, or at least being aware
let's
that...
do a sum up. For me, I think it's cool to just have that somewhat ability. So it's like, okay, something's happened, and you can use this for like triviality purposes. So maybe in 20 years' time, you could look back and be like, I remember when I used my first BTC peer-to-peer payment. Like I remember the first time I really touched it. And then that's sort of like just like a campfire story that everyone tells. You know, I remember the first time I watched my first YouTube video, that sort of thing. And then also perhaps it can be like, oh, this is a trend that I see is going to be huge in the future. Like I'm going to make a prediction now. And so somewhat like we have, which was like we think that, well, at least I personally think that the combination of value for value with the soundest money ever created is going to change so many, I don't know, the way so many things act, so many actions that I do now, banking wise and on my phone, I think will change. And so I sort of want to be more part of it and lean into it as much as I can now. Hence with, podcasting 2.0 and doing Boostagram Lounge and things like that.
Yeah.
So for me, I find it useful thinking like, okay, this is somewhat of a historical trend. I'm living in history right now, and I want to lean into it more because I think this will be huge in the future. And I can be wrong on that, and that's totally fine.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think my thing I land on, and I like the living in the moment aspect of, yes, because it's like, say with BTC or anything with payments or whatever have you, to be in the moment and recognize something that's happening now so you can recall back later, and you could either replay it via writing or journaling or videoing or whatever it may be. Like we'll be able to replay one of our, like when we first did the first ever NFT conversation podcast, we can relive it and be like, oh wow, I actually talked about it then.
Damn, I wish I'd bought it 3 months later.
3 months later. So it's all that sort of level of like, oh yeah, we can relive history in that way because we're recording it and living in memory. But I think I stand with that. If anybody can say like, oh yeah, I'm living in history, and you call that out like if something's happening, you go, yes, I'm living in history now, then I think it's a fool's errand, because you can only call history, posthumously when it's already happened and it has become what it's deemed to be at a level historical. Because in the same sense, I could see someone tells me like, well, this is a historical thing, like I want to be living in history. I'll be like, well, what about all the other stuff that you're not thinking about to be living in history about? Like, is that not historical, or is it just because you're just choosing now to be conscious about a specific thing to be historical about? Because I'm sure there's something historical happening about AI, but shit, I'm sure nobody of us has even thinking about it. But if 200 years from now it's like, oh, by the way, that's when 2022 they did the first attempt of this particular robotic thing, and I'd be like, well, holy hell, like I didn't know about it, so I don't know how I could have told you I was living in history during that time.
Yeah.
But I do agree that living in the moment and being more conscious of the things that are happening makes for a wonderful thing in the future, because you can relive it so much better.
Yeah.
So-
It's just a mode of thinking, similar to how, discipline equals freedom is hugely impactful for you. And for me, it's like, I guess like I can.
It's almost like
I
an
kind of-
oxymoron to you, to be honest.
Yeah. Like it's not something that I would ever find useful to contemplate, for example. And that's cool. Like it's just a way of my particular way is living in history. Oh yeah, that's kind of something I could use. For you, it's not, and that's cool.
I think it was summarizing here, mere models as Sam Harris doesn't know what he's talking about. And by proxy, Karen.
I don't know, man. When he starts talking about politics, that's when I tune out.
I haven't. Oh yeah, I remember when he used to talk about Trump all the time.
No.
Damn, I forgot about that.
Well, Trump will probably run again, and so it'll start
come back
appearing
again.
like all on his podcast, which I actually haven't listened to for a fair while. I should probably check that out. Coolies, thanks everyone. I'm gonna just see what's happening in the chat. They're talking about
Bed wedding.
yeah, just it's random stuff. It's not even worth bringing up.
Good.
So thank you everyone for tuning into this episode. If you want to, I'll give you a little prompt here. Do you find thinking the topic of today, living in history, do you think that's something that's useful to even contemplate, or is it just a nothing? Like it doesn't even make sense. I'd like to know whose side maybe people fall more towards on, my side or one side, in terms of whether this is actually a useful, I don't know, mental model maybe or something like that,
like
or
a
a
concept or something
useful
like that,
concept
yeah.
or tool. So send in through a Boostagram doing that. The best way to do that, I think at the moment, is probably using Fountain FM. So if you just download the Fountain app, you can, the beauty of this is you can listen to us and just be earning Satoshis through the app. I don't know how this model works. I really need to chat with Oscar about how the hell he's he's funding all of this.
I have no idea.
But you can earn sats, and so any sats amount you can send through. We still read out the 2 sat donations.
That's right.
Make sure,
For right now.
just
For
make
right
sure.
now.
Yeah, just make sure you say it in Spanish.
Yeah. For now, we'll still be reading that, but I'm sure, eventually and hopefully, when we're starting to get to the levels where
Yeah,
it's
like-
it's quite a few. Okay, we're going to put a level of like, okay, if you're...
A limit or a
if it's
quality
not
level.
100,000, we're not going to read your name. Like, that's the level.
So everyone, thank you for joining in to the Mere Models Musing session. We'll be back again next week, same time, and hope you can join us like everyone else in the chat has been doing. It's been a very exciting one.
Good. Thank you very much, everybody. That's it. 1 out.
Going out. Historical moment.
Good.
Right down. Oh, geez, what are you guys talking about in here? I was talking about Liam and his Liam's about the discussion continues in Discord, so I'm told.
Okay. I haven't even seen.
Or maybe that's what Peter's saying, and that's they should go over. Yeah, go over to the Discord, and I'll be chatting with you guys. It's just a rumor. Broken heart is not easily remembered. It could be a rumor, but some where there is smoke, there is fire. It's hard to put out a bushfire. It could be in Queensland. Thank you, Juan and Karen. Have a good week. Thank you very much, Mr.
that Peter?
Broad Shoulders. No, this is
No,
Broad
Joey.
Shoulders. AKA Liam is 29 and what's the bed? So I've been told.
So
Just
we've
rumor on
been
the
told
street.
exactly.
Just rumor on the street. Liam, you might want to address these rumors that have been spreading around, mate. All right, thanks everyone. I'll go to the Discord and we'll continue chatting there.